In Amnesty International, we've spent over 4 years doing research on the situation in Palestine, taking the context and the history of the conflict. And in February 2022, we published our research that speaks and explains why Israel is implementing a system of apartheid against the Palestinian people. Adding to that, also, we speak about it in context of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So usually I go a lot to schools to do workshops and to colleges, and that's where I start the conversation. I bring them the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, show them all 30 articles, and we speak about it, and we speak about what rights are there in Ireland, what rights maybe are missing in Ireland, and then we take it to the wider context of the world. And then we speak about Palestine itself. We give examples on how it's working in Palestine and how Palestinian peoples are not getting these rights like anyone else. And from that also we bring some examples. For example, there was a child called Nasser Eliazi in August 2020. He was waiting on leaving Gaza to do a surgery in East Jerusalem in a Palestinian hospital, and he wasn't granted the permission. He was 18 months then. And then by the age of 2, while waiting on his permit, he died. So we speak about how the system of apartheid didn't allow him to leave because he's a Palestinian, while if he was an Israeli citizen, he would have, or a Jewish Israeli, he would have been maybe airlifted if it's urgent. And that's how the lives of the Palestinians are seen as less than the lives of the Israeli Jewish people. And then speaking about Gaza, just to use my time wisely, I know 15 minutes, you can't really pack too much in it. But the escalation of the conflict or the war in Gaza between Israel and Gaza, it's something that really didn't happen out of nowhere. And we know the armed conflict between Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories have been going on for a very long time. And the present situation after 7th of October, where Hamas killed over 120 people with other armed group, Palestinian armed group, and took hostages from Israel, that didn't happen out of nowhere, because in 2007, for example, there was the blockade, the illegal blockade on Gaza Strip imposed, where everything is restricted. No one can leave Gaza without permission. Nothing can enter Gaza without Israel allowing whatever is going on. So this was a system of isolating Gaza from the world and isolating them also from other Palestinians who are in the West Bank or in East Jerusalem. Now, another issue is the denial of the right to return for the refugees in Gaza itself, because over 70% of the people in Gaza, which is like around 1.5 million, are refugees. They're originally from cities, are now what's called now Israel. And the United Nations acknowledges their right to return, but they can't return there because it's completely now different cities, different houses, different villages. So they are being stuck, cramped in Gaza in a very dense area. Now, adding to that as well, we try to explain the difference between, for example, the humanitarian, international humanitarian law and international human rights, where international human rights are the rights that all humans should be entitled to and should be given, regardless if it's peace or war, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other instruments. But we focus more during conflict time on explaining what the international humanitarian law, because it applies in conflicts. And you would have some people questioning, or some students sometimes, they would say, yeah, why would this law be implemented while the armed group in Gaza carried their attacks on Israel? So yeah, we say even if what they did was wrong, killing civilians is wrong, but it should not be also encountered by killing civilians from the other side. And now the international humanitarian law is really very important in protecting civilians in these conflicts. Now, the first thing, you shouldn't, the armed forces or attacking forces should not displace any person or evacuate any person. But as we see the situation folding in Gaza now, the majority of the residents in Gaza have run away to the south, to Rafah, a very small area, and they are locked there. They can't even leave to Egypt or anywhere. And these civilians should not have been displaced or evacuated in these situations, because you'd be out of your home, which means you have nothing really to take with you more than a bag in this war, if you manage to take a bag. And yeah, Israel instruction of the 1.1 million people who are living in the north of Gaza to be evacuated they were dropping leaflets for them, asking them to leave. This goes against international humanitarian law, and it's a violation of it. These things usually students are not aware these instruments are there to protect civilians, and then there should be a humanitarian access to medical care, to relief, and aid workers should always be protected and shouldn't be targeted. But Amnesty International has people on the ground who are researching what's going on and trying to document war crimes or the violation of the humanitarian law. And they found that some medical staff were deliberately attacked, hospitals have been bombed, and all parties, for example, including Israel, Egypt, and Gaza, should allow the aid to enter Gaza. But now we know there's a lot of aid trucks are waiting at the borders. So again, for students, in the school, we explain to them how this aid should enter Gaza and shouldn't be blocked by any means. The other things is that the conduct of hostility. So an appropriate response should always be on the policies of whoever would retaliate. And there are rules in fighting. So yeah, during wars, even wars should have rules. And this means both sides, Israelis and Palestinian armed groups, including Hamas, that's having a lot of the hostages, Israeli ones, must respect this international humanitarian law and cease to indiscriminately attack people, especially when there are areas that are full of civilians. If you want to attack areas like this, you should know that there are a lot of civilians that will go as casualty, and you can't say this is just collateral damage, because you should do every measure to prevent that. But Israeli military response, it appeared that it doesn't really follow this rule of international humanitarian law. Now there are a lot of other restrictions on the people of Gaza, and that violates another rule. Like, for example, there is no electricity for them, there is no water for them, there is no food for them to be supplied by Gaza, by Israel. And Israel, as an occupier, they have a duty, according to international law, to provide these things to the people they occupy. And we see that top officials from the Israeli side stated that they will starve Gaza, and stated that there will be no electricity or water. And the previous presentation about water was really, really essential to see, even in the West Bank, outside this context, or outside this war physically, water has been taken away from the Palestinians. And in Gaza, it's even worse. People don't have clean water, and we know diseases and epidemics can spread wildly because of lack of hygiene and because of lack of medical care and lack of medical supplies. And most of the hospitals are dysfunctional now because they have been destroyed by the Israeli forces. Now, I can share later on this document with you, but all these rules, we explain them one by one to the students, and to see why, or sorry, to show why the international humanitarian law is something that should be like, if I may say this, like the Bible of the war. Even if you want to attack armed groups, you should not attack civilians, or not consider that there are civilians in that area. Now we explain what's lawful and what's unlawful in these situations from a human rights lens. So shooting enemies who are soldiers or fighters, or maybe capturing fighters to get some information from them to reduce the damage, are things that can be lawful, but also you should allow humanitarian aid work to bring food and medicine to civilians. You cannot target medical staff or relief staff. Now there should be zones that are safe, and none of the fighters or the two parties that are fighting or are in them. But there are unlawful things like shooting enemy soldiers that have surrendered, for example, and laid down their arms, shelling a hospital or a school in which it's not used for military purposes. And there were a lot of evidence that some of the UN schools that were only sheltering displaced people have been bombed. Another thing also, firing rockets, for example, from areas that are populated by civilians is against the international humanitarian law, and it's unlawful. Bombing military targets in this proportionate way, where if you exceed using the power, the civilians around it will be killed. Targeting the main resources, like, for example, targeting water whales or tanks, or targeting the essential supply of the city to inhibit civilians from getting their water or getting their electricity, is also unlawful. Yeah, or even taking hostages, civilians as hostages, using human shield. All these things are unlawful in this war. Now there are a few myths later on. Maybe when I send this document, you can look at them. For example, the conflict between the state of Israel and Hamas is too complex for international humanitarian law. An easy way to debunk this is just to say international humanitarian law applies to everyone regardless, and the principles of international humanitarian law, such as the protection of civilians and medical staff, or even hostages or detained people, it applies for everyone. Sometimes some people would say it's permissible to target civilians' infrastructure if they are suspected military operations. That area also, that's another myth that we need to debunk, because sometimes the armed group that's carrying on the hostility will use this myth for their advantage. And there are several things in this document that are related to the humanitarian law. However, I put on the document, the Google document, I put a link to 90 minutes course in several it's available in several languages, and it explains the system of apartheid before the 7th of October. And there is a video as well, a link, 14 minutes, I usually play for the students, that explains the system of apartheid as well against Palestinians in the West Bank, citizens of Israel in Gaza, and even in East Jerusalem. And another thing, we have an action link, which is a petition to call for ceasefire. I inserted that as well, and I will be sending on the documents to you. I think my time should be finished now. Is that right? Or do you still have them?
Thanks, Talha. Yeah, you've just about a minute left if you want to finish up with anything else. But
yeah,
thank you.
Just one thing to again emphasize on that: the conflict started on the 7th of October is one of the myths as well, because as we explained before, the system of apartheid against the Palestinians, including in Gaza, have been going on for a very long time, and 16 years of blockade on Gaza is something really unbearable for a population, inhumane, and it's against a humanitarian law, and it's against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you.